Hello nerds and happy fall to most of the temperate northern hemisphere. Sorry, Australia. Welcome to the Geek Girl Story Salon, where I talk to creatives from across disciplines and across the world about the art of storytelling. I'm your host, Jen Jackalone, lifelong storyteller and head geek in charge. We've got some great guests in the coming weeks, including actor Belinda Bromelo of Hulu's The Great. So if you're not already following us, smash that like and subscribe button to stay up to date on the heaping helpings of brain food coming your way, courtesy of our partners, fleetoffandoms.com and Ilva Publishing. Today, we're kicking off spooky season with my guest, who happens to be the artist for one of my favorite new comics of the last 5 years, Harrow County. He's also known for the current Lonesome Hunters, Wolfchild series, and beautiful graphic novels like Petrograd. Welcome to the show, Tyler Crook. I'm so glad we could make this happen.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here. That was a lovely introduction.
Thank you. I take a certain amount of pride in introducing people, but you know, it helps that I invite people on that I'm genuinely excited to talk to.
Nice. Yeah, I'm really glad to be here.
That was the whole point of this show. You know what? I'm just gonna talk to people who are doing work that I get excited about.
Yeah, it would be really hard to do otherwise, I would imagine.
Honestly, like, I don't know how Stephen Colbert does it. You know he has to talk to people that he's not super psyched to talk to sometimes. Like at that level, it has to just come with the job. So
yeah,
like, my hat's off to him. So this has just sort of been a running theme in the last few weeks, the last bunch of shows that I've been talking with people. We've been talking about creativity during COVID. And I wondered about when quarantine was going on, what was happening for you creatively?
Man, it is hard to even really sort of like get a bead on what I was thinking at the time. I think so creatively, I had actually just gotten Lonesome Hunters approved and was supposed to start on it right when COVID started up, and so that actually got postponed for I guess a year and a half or something like that. I ended up doing a book with whenever I do interviews, everyone's name just jumps out of my head. Jeff Lemire. I ended up doing a book with Jeff Lemire called Colonel Weird, or was it called Colonel Weird Cosmagog, and then I followed that up with doing another Jeff Lemire book with his Unteen stuff. So creatively, I was sort of just really had my head down and was doing work. There wasn't really for me exploring anything particularly personal or anything, but I was really sort of focused on work, the technical aspects of my work at that time. I think I did start doing a comic on Instagram where I was drawing a panel per day of like an alien abduction sci-fi story. And I'm still working on that, but I decided to take it off Instagram, and I'm just working on it as it's going to be a book. Okay. But I think that part was very much sort of informed by a lot of the pandemic and a lot of the political stuff going on at the time. Mm-hmm. And is sort of ongoing, really, like where it really felt like everyone was being held hostage by the worst and stupidest people on the planet, and yeah, I mean, I it's one of those things where I have worked home alone. Well, my wife works from home too, so we just hang out with each other 24/7, even in the good times. And so like I did not see like a huge change in sort of my day-to-day life, really. Which, I'm really fortunate in that respect, I think.
Yeah, well, for me, it's not so different, except for the fact that I have school-age children.
Oh, geez, yeah.
So that, fortunately, when you get along with your spouse, it helps a lot.
Yeah.
but yeah, having 24/7 with the kids around us. I mean, I love them, and I have great relationships with them, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, there was definitely for a lot of people, there's like a piece of media, maybe it was like an album or like a book or genre book or something, where they really kind of fused to it during that time, and it just sort of became a part of their personality. Did you have anything like that?
I don't think I did.
No,
I
no.
well, you know what? That's not true. There was an album by Silver Mount Zion
Mm,
that I really got into, and they have one particular song. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called. Let me look it up real quick. So it's I don't know if you've ever heard of a band called uh it's like Godspeed Ye Black Emperor.
yes, yes.
So it's some of those guys, but it's without it's like they do singing instead of just doing straight instrumentals on everything.
Okay.
Um and so they have a song, it's called something like Dead Marines or something like that, that
Mm,
just has this really, it's really, really long. And it sort of goes through all these like permutations. And there's a part of it that really just, when I first heard it, was one of those few songs that like it hit me in just the perfect way to like, move me to tears. And it's this part of the song where he sings that, so he sings about all the friends that he's lost over
hmm
time for all these different reasons. And then there's a little break, and then they sort of come back in singing, and he's like, um, he sings about like going for walks with his dog and
hmm
playing with his dog and just how perfect his dog is. And I was just like, mine too, so that was a song that I had on loop a lot at the time, I think.
What was the
And I
name
still
of it?
actually,
What was it
oh,
called
I was
again?
going to look it up and I
Okay.
stopped. Let me see.
Our recommended list or something.
God Bless Our Dead Marines.
Bless our dead Marines. Okay.
Yeah. The whole album is really good, but that's the first track off there. And it's 11 minutes and 44 seconds, so
Wow.
it's
That's
a good one.
yeah. That sounds like something that my depressed teenage son would really like.
Yeah. I think if I was a depressed teenager, I mean, I think I'm still like channeling a lot of that same energy.
Yeah, yeah, no, totally. It's like, King Crimson or whatever, like I'll come in and he's got like, their cover of The Man Who Sold the World playing and the 10-minute version. And so I'm like, okay, cool. Dinner.
Yeah. Man,
Um,
it's so funny. There's so many like albums that I have that I just cannot listen to because they like take me back so viscerally to like my angsty teen years that it's like an incredibly unpleasant experience.
Absolutely. I can't, much as I love her, I can't listen to Tori Amos's Little Earthquakes anymore for that exact reason.
I
Oh,
that's
Twitter.
one that I have a very similar reaction to, but I can take it in small doses.
Right. Like,
Like the Cure's Disintegration is like untouchable for me. That's
yeah,
that's a bridge too far.
yeah, yeah. I can feel that. It's like, oh goodness, that day in like 1992 when, yeah,
You know,
yeah, definitely. Um, so, just to kind of get into some more general creative questions,
mhm.
how do you think about your role in the storytelling process?
um, I think that specifically with comics, I think that I think the closest analog to a comic book artist would be a movie director. There's a lot of, I mean, an artist, like especially working with a really good and sort of generous writer, the
Mm,
artist is the person who's doing all the casting and all of the scene blocking and adjusting the pacing and adding a few shots here and there to like make the story like flow and gel a little bit better. I mean, the the roles as I see it is that a writer um, invents the story, and then the artist is the person who tells the story. And so, like, so I think the basic role of like the role that I have in when I'm working with a writer. Yeah, but I also sort of take a cue from improv stuff where they have that rule where you always have to say yes
Mm.
and I try and I'm able, I think I can succeed most of the time at this, but like sometimes you'll get it, you know, a writer will put together an idea that when it's presented to you, my very first reaction is like, that's really dumb. You know, like I don't like that idea at all. And then I have to remind myself that I have to like be like, no, I have to say yes to this and do what I have to do to sort of make it something that I also believe in without like diminishing what the writer is bringing to it.
Right.
So I think I think that's a good sort of practice for just collaborations in general, is just to keep that yes and, because otherwise you're just sort of fighting the same thing instead of both surfing the same wave.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love doing collaborative stuff. But it can be hard to find the right people where you have a level of trust. And
yeah,
like when someone brings an idea, how do you say, okay, this doesn't isn't necessarily working for me, but what if we did this
yeah,
and build
yeah,
off of it instead of like just shooting stuff down? Because it's easy to shoot stuff down, you know.
yeah, yeah. And especially like yeah, if you don't have anything better to replace it with. But I still like, on top of that, like I think like for example in Harrow County, I thought when Cullen first pitched the skinless boy, um, who if the viewers don't know, the skinless boy is a character in Harrow County who is sort of divided into two parts. There's this boy's flayed skin, and the the body of the boy, his like fleshless or his skinless self that runs around and goes and does stuff.
The muscle
And
and bones and yeah.
yeah, yeah. And when he first pitched that to me, I was like, that's gonna look dumb every time I draw it. Like, how do I make this work? But then after like giving it some thought, I sort of realized that it's like the skinless boy in the story functions like some really cool ghost technology. You know, it's like, oh, we can send this, you know, his body over there to listen, and then his skin over here can like
Right.
report on what he's seeing.
Right.
And then I was able to find a few moments that I just really loved. Like there was a scene that Cullen wrote where Emmy is like doing the wash, and is hanging up the skin after having just washed it. And the skinless portion of him comes over and is talking to Emmy about it, and just reaches up and holds his own hand as his skin is hanging off the thing. And like there's some things like that that I thought once I could get to that point, I was just 100% in on what Cullen was trying to accomplish.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, he's probably sort of, I don't know. I don't know if you consider him one of the Haints or if he's more of just a critter.
Yeah, I think we would classify him as a haint. I think we call everything that isn't just a sort of a vanilla human a haint.
But yeah, I would say Skinless Boy is up there, and I love that clothesline moment. But he's up there as one of my favorites,
Hmm.
along with Malachi.
Oh, interesting.
I really liked Malachi, and I can't even unpack what it is about him.
Hmm.
But when he came to you with that description, like what was your reaction? I mean, because basically it's like he's this big, like he's six eyes or whatever, bull man thing. Like how did
Hmm.
you did you picture what he was kind of laying down, or did you have to kind of work through that a little?
Well, I think the way Cullen originally described him was more of a smoke monster. I think originally he was supposed to be sort of like constantly transforming. So from panel to panel, he would be a completely different shape.
Hmm.
And I did some character designs about that, and felt pretty good about it. But then as soon as I started laying out the pages and working on it, I was like, I realized it would be like impossible to follow, because you when you have a character who changes shape from panel to panel, it's like you really have to work so hard to make sure that the reader knows that this is the same person,
Mm-hmm.
even though they look totally different every time you look at them.
Right.
So we sort of nailed him down to a not a shape changey form.
Mm.
And then I think his sort of design morphed over time. I mean, he really started it out as being somebody who we never really fully saw. Like it was always at night, and it was always in
Mm-hmm.
the woods, and he was always
Mm-hmm.
black against black. And so
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of sort of his design that just evolved as we moved through the story.
Mm.
And so I think he was ended up being quite a bit different looking than when we first started.
Mm.
His final design just sort of evolved out of his usefulness to the story, I guess. It's like
Mm.
what he needed to look like in order to fit what was happening, and fit the
Mm.
progression of the plot and everything.
Mm. Right, because at first all you see is just the sets of eyes in the dark.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's one of those things where it's like I always try to, like, there's a couple process or steps in drawing a comic,
Mm.
and usually I'll go through and do thumbnail layouts for every page, and usually I do that before I design the characters,
Mm.
because once I have the story laid out and like have a placeholder person for whatever monster is going to be there,
Mm.
um, then I can understand how they fit in the story and how they need to occupy the space on the page better and stuff, and then I can design something with a lot more intention, because I find often that if I design something beforehand, the
Mm.
second I go to use that character on the page, the design just goes off to the, whatever they actually need to be. And
Right.
that original design just kind of gets thrown away anyway.
Mm. So how specific would, like, say with working with Cullen, like how specific did he get with you? Like were his scripts sort of like by page and by panel? Was he thinking that way, or did he leave a lot of that up to you?
It is the scripts that he gives me are, yeah, they're like page and panel broken
Hmm.
down,
Hmm.
but they're also, he's not like Alan Moore where he's writing 3 pages of text to describe a single panel. Cullen is really good at just sort of giving you the minimum that you need to tell the story, and then leaving me the options for how exactly I place the camera,
Hmm.
or how I sort of arrange the scene, and how I divide the page up into its panels and stuff.
Right.
And usually he'll indicate like, this is a panel I think should be the biggest on the page, or something like that.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, he's really good at leaving giving his artists a lot of flexibility, and also he's good at just letting us do our thing. Like he's really one of those people who works with artists that he trusts, I think, and
Hmm.
gives us a lot of leeway to change stuff. I mean, I've added, um, especially early on in Harrow County, I added pages constantly. I was like, I think there was, of the first like 8 issues, every single one of them, or almost every single one of them, went over, because I was like, oh, I want to like extend this scene. And it's really hard to add just 1 page because of how the book has to flow. It's like you have to add 2 pages. So then you have to, and he would just sort of, he was happy to let me do that.
Oh, I mean, that's great.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, like, because I do a little screenwriting as well, and it's the same sort of approach when you're, as the writer, you're like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I write this thing, but you know, you absolutely should not be directing from the page, because you have to leave room for the other people that are in the
Yeah.
process. And that's that was, as a, I was a novelist first, so that was kind of a hard kind of head change for me to like
Mm-hmm.
get used to.
Well, and it's so easy too, I think. Like, as making comics is really big, because you have or it's really difficult because you have the limitation of a page.
Mhm.
And it is incredibly easy if you start being specific at the beginning, you're going to paint yourself into a corner by the end and not be able to accomplish what you're actually setting out to do. So it's like you always have to sort of find ways of working where you're very general and you get the whole thing, and then you sort of make the whole thing a little bit more specific, and then the whole thing a little more specific. But if the script was like really specific at the get-go, yeah, you'd be stuck. You know,
Right.
you'd hit a corner really fast.
I would imagine so.
Yeah.
But that's great. I mean, again, it's like the trust in a collaborative relationship is sort of everything. And, he trusts you to do
Yeah.
you, so that leaves you a lot of freedom.
Yeah. Cullen is one of my favorite writers to work with, I think, because he's just really good at that. And he's a really good writer too. Like the stuff that he's always brought to me has always been really incredible.
Yeah. Well, obviously I'm a huge fan. I actually had him on a few weeks ago and we had a pretty good time talking about and also like he just seems like a really like nice, like down to earth, normal dude. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's really a jackpot, I think, when you hit, somebody who can really bring it creatively and is also kind of just easy to work with and as a person and open to listening and stuff. Because I
Yeah.
mean, you guys must go back and forth a little. He might send you a script and you might say, well, shouldn't we extend this or, like that kind of thing?
Not as much as you might imagine.
Hmm.
There's a lot of there's a lot of Harrow County that he would just give me the script and I would just do the art, and that was sort of it. I think the sort of give and take came the most when so there were a couple points in working on that series where we sort of had to sort of get together and talk about what the next 10 issues were going to be, sort of a thing. And there were a couple times when I had an idea for something that I wanted to see at some point and would just sort of pitch it to him, and then I wouldn't know when it would come back, like if or even if it would come back. I would just sort of like there was a thing, I can't remember the exact when I brought it to Cullen, but there was a part where there a group of hunters come into Harrow County and they bring their hunting dogs with them.
Mhm.
And I really thought it would be really freaky if the dogs went to like howl, but didn't. They just sort of like acted like they were going to howl, and then that showed up in the story,
Mm.
later on.
Mm. And how about from the perspective of lore? Like, do you know as much about the world as he does? Does he tell you
Um,
as he's working, or does he surprise you with stuff a lot?
he surprises me with stuff. I mean, he's much better read when it comes to folklore stuff and old occult stuff and stuff like that. Like he really knows a lot of it. And in Harrow County, I think most of it was made up, but I don't think you could just make that stuff up without being pretty well versed on folklore stuff.
Yeah, well, sort of going in with the intention that it should feel like something real.
Yeah,
Like it should
yeah,
feel
that it
like
should.
real folklore, but
Yeah, if you
actually,
read this in a real folklore book, you wouldn't be shocked.
right,
It would feel
exactly.
right.
So I want to talk about the flaming skeletons.
Okay.
So that was you, wasn't it?
Um, I can't remember. That was yeah, I think in the originally they were just supposed to be glowing ghosts, like glowing skeletons.
Hmm.
And made them flaming. And I think my idea was that they would be if they were ghosts, they were like um they were tortured somehow, they were like being forced to remain on Earth or whatever. And so I wanted to make them flaming, but then I also wanted to make sure that the flames weren't felt a little bit ghostly. So like the flames are always a little bit sort of juicy and bubbly feeling instead of like
Mm,
that real energy, crackly flame feeling.
mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, no, I really love those ghosts. Every time they showed up in the script, it's like they made the pages look better because it's almost always at night and you just get this bright burst of color.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and they're fun characters. I mean, they're the kind of characters that if ghosts were real, you would kind of hope this is how they would be. They just sort of show up when they need to, and they very gently are like, I don't go here or whatever. They're generally helpful, even though
Mm-hmm. They look
they're these tortured spirits.
terrifying.
Yeah, yeah. And skeletons are always super fun to draw.
Yeah,
They're just really fun. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, in general, like I love the creature design, like Priscilla and the other goblins and whatever, like those guys all like that must have come out of you mostly, right?
Um, a lot of it did. A lot of it it was probably maybe 50-50. I think
Hmm.
there was a lot of stuff where Cullen would just give a list of um oh, hold on, my cat's gonna drink my paint water. Sorry about that.
No, no,
um
no.
so the a lot of times Cullen would have a list because there was so many scenes with like 10 monsters sort of appear and they're all unique and stuff. And so lots of times he would have a list of like, here's who he thinks would be there. And then I would uh pick and choose who I wanted to include, or lots of times I would add some other stuff or whatever. I think every time you see an animal, so I had a notion that there's all these haints out in the woods running around doing their own thing. And I had this idea that some of the woodland creatures would like befriend the haints and go off on with the haints adventures. So whenever there's like a huge group of haints, there's always like a little rabbit or there's a bear that hangs out quite a bit. And it's just like my idea was that they were like all buddies out in the woods. So that I think like that sort of thing was my contribution. But
See, I love that.
yeah,
I feel like you could do like a lot of like little mini adventures about like the rabbit hanging out with the haint and
yeah,
like
yeah.
you
Like I
know.
imagine the rabbit is like maybe being bullied by the other rabbits, and then he
Hmm.
goes and makes some haint friends so he can be
Hmm.
like, "Don't mess with me, I got haint buddies."
Right, right, yeah. You get a raccoon that falls down a fairy ring and like
Yeah, learns to eat fairy trash or whatever.
yeah, yeah. Right. Yeah, I wonder. I mean, it would either be really good or you maybe would like, turn him into something like
Yeah,
eldritch.
monstrous.
But yeah, I would love that. Not that I'm putting in a request, but I think that would be really fun. Um, so all right, so you mentioned paint water. So are you like 100% analog guy? Like it's paper and paint and
I'm not a
that's
hundred
it?
percent.
Or
I do all my pencils on my computer,
okay.
and actually I do most of it on my iPad nowadays. But then I print those out and I ink and paint on paper.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
So
and then
it's
I
a
add the lettering at the end with I do that digitally.
mm, that's a nice sort of mixed approach that I mean the result is really feels organic.
Well, thanks. Yeah, no, it's sort of like I sort of try to put the parts that are sort of planning parts
Hmm.
on the computer because it's really easy to move things around and change things as you go.
Hmm.
But then once I sort of figure out um, what I want a page to look like, then I can just print it out and focus on having fun with
Right, right.
drawing.
Well, that's really nice too. It gives you some flexibility because then you like if you go in to do the color and it's not, you're not feeling it, you can just print it out and try again, do
Yeah,
something
yeah, no,
different.
and I've had to do that. Luckily, I don't have to do that very often, but like every once in a while, I'll have to, yeah, completely scrap a page and I can just print it out and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah, I mean, I guess the alternate would be I could just light box it, but yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, you working digitally actually just is it's a great tool. But I really don't enjoy sitting in front of my computer all day, and
Mhm.
so I really try to get that out of the way as fast as possible.
Right, right, right. It's just it's interesting because you have like your style has this like vintage kind of like it really works well with these kind of very like old school kind of feeling stories like Harrow County like that's kind of all like in the 30s and thereabouts, I
Hmm.
guess, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And then Petrograd, which was this like monochromatic sort of thing. Um, it feels very it's timeless, but it feels like it works really well with some of the more vintagey stuff.
that's awesome. Thank you very much. I really like doing period stuff. Like when Cullen first pitched me Harrow County,
Mm,
um, it was set in modern, like it was contemporary,
mm,
and I called him up and was like, we should really do this like back in like the 30s. We should do this in Depression era, like sort of paper moon era
mhm.
South, and
Mm.
that would be way more interesting.
So I have all
And
right, so I have you to thank for that.
yeah, well, and especially like that era. I like the clothes from that era
Yeah.
a lot. I really like all those dresses that are made out of flour sacks
Hmm.
material and stuff. Like I think that stuff is really fascinating and really cool.
Well, it must be like it's also just fun to draw, like getting the textural kind of
Yeah,
feel of it
yeah, for
and,
sure. There's like,
and
yeah, the way, yeah, like the even the architecture was
mhm.
like really fun, especially sort of in like it's really fun to draw. I guess it probably wouldn't be as fun to live in some of those buildings, but it's like really fun to artistically to explore. Yeah.
Sure, sure. Yeah, well, I mean, it's like, I mean, and I'm not on your level by any means, but I draw a little bit, and like, it's always fun to sort of do the stuff that's gritty and like it's,
Hmm. Well, and I think when you do something that's a period piece, it gives you like that little something to really bite into and
mm,
put the the story in a very specific time and place. I mean, there's a lot of artists in comics who don't like doing what they call backgrounds, but
mm,
for me, that's like really important. Like I like drawing backgrounds as much as I like drawing the people because
mm,
I like I feel like every story has to be in a very, very specific place. And if you don't have that place sort of fleshed out, then it really feels unmoored and like it doesn't feel like it's really anchored
mm.
in a in its own reality kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's, and the effect speaks for itself. It's like, Harrow County is so immersive and I mean, obviously a lot of that is the story, but you know, it's
Yeah.
also just the visual aspect of it. How
You know,
did you? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the woods were a big thing about it. I mean, going back again to when Colin was first telling me pitching me the story, um, I had just moved to Oregon, um, and was we had moved to Oregon from Southern California, so I was sort of like living in a forest for the first time in my life, and
Mm,
like we were on the Oregon coast, and I could walk out of my house and in 20 minutes of walking be in around 100-year-old trees, and that
mm,
like I'd never been and like spent any amount of time in a place like that before. And so when Cullen was like, there's all these ghosts and goblins out in the woods, I was like, wait a minute, woods do I get to draw these woods? And got very excited about doing that. And that's sort of ongoing too, even in the most recent arc of the Lonesome Hunters. There's a lot of woods that
mm.
I really love drawing trees and forests and stuff.
Yeah, all the like the bark textures and the
Yeah,
yeah,
and the way the light comes through and stuff, it's all just really, really fun and fascinating to me.
yeah. So let's talk about The Wolf Child because I got to read
Oh,
the issues that you sent me.
mhm.
So I guess I'm now a little ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, I sent you
Um,
all four, right?
you did, yeah.
Okay,
And it's gorgeous, of course.
thank you.
Um, you mentioned that this one is very personal for you. Why is that?
Um, and there's a lot of stuff going on in it that is very personal. This is one of those stories that I had planned it just before um, uh, the pandemic, like I said earlier, and my idea with it was that I would sort of take everything that I was well, I don't know if that was really the point, but it ended up being that it was like everything that I was really heavily on my mind started to come through in this story. There's a lot of stuff about sort of intergenerational trauma and ways that we sort of have to cope with um, like huge levels of uncertainty in our life and how we progress forward, not knowing uh, what what's going to happen or anything and I guess a lot of it was my little sister died of a brain aneurysm
Hmm,
um
sorry.
just a year or two before that and it was one of those things that came out of absolutely nowhere. It was
Hmm,
like she was she sort of just woke up one morning and then was like had a headache, and then a couple hours later she was dead.
wow.
And it is the height it's the height of terror for me, because it's like that just someone you love could just disappear like that is really really painful. And I think there's a
Hmm,
lot of forms of that. People die in car wrecks and stuff. And so much of the Lonesome Hunters is sort of born out of that idea of like what we live in, this world that is just chaotic on a level that we can't really even acknowledge if we're going to function through the day.
hmm,
And um and how do you do that? And most of the Lonesome Hunters comes to the conclusion that you do it through um, finding someone that you love and sort of like protecting each other and moving through the world in that way.
hmm,
um, so that's sort of the root of the Lonesome Hunters, but it's sort of wrapped up in this hopefully fun sort of supernatural urban fantasy story about
hmm,
this old man and a young woman who sort of team up to basically they have to get rid of a magical sword that they have,
hmm,
um, because it's just too dangerous, and they're definitely not the people who should have this incredibly powerful sword.
hmm,
And so the first story arc I really was really about establishing these two characters as friends and sort of setting them on their adventure. And then the second story arc is sort of exploring um, well, the initial idea of the second story arc was that I wanted to make it clear how dangerous the sword really was.
hmm,
And by the fourth issue, I think it's really clear how dangerous the sword can be. And but it's also, the whole time it's really sort of building on these two characters and the sort of stuff that they're carrying with them and how they're trying to deal with like living in their own skin and
hmm,
navigating the world at the same time.
hmm. Yeah, well, we got to see a lot of that with the young girl Lupe,
Mm-hmm.
and just how dealing with this wolf who was dying kind of brought her back to her own mother's death, and
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that was I mean it was beautiful. It was definitely like it was one of those things where you read and you're just like, ah.
Nice. That's exactly. There's there's a thing online a couple weeks ago where somebody was like, share an image that shows the story that you're working on, and I shared the Nine Inch Nails meme where Trent Reznor
Mm.
comes out on stage and it's got the little text at the bottom, and he says, "Hey everybody, you here to have a good time? You here to party? Well, that's the last band. That's not us. We're here to have a bad time." And then synthesizer music plays.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's
Well,
where we're at with the Lonesome Hunters, I think.
but honestly, like there's something to that in good art. Like it was a really famous thing that BB King used to open his shows with, "Is everybody feeling bad? Good."
I had never heard that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. He's like, "Look, man, this is a blues show, and we're here to like
Have
have
the blues or do
exactly,
yeah.
exactly." Um, so for you, I mean, there's a lot of anybody who creates, I think there's multiple drivers that are kind of moving them to do that. What would you say like your primary driver or one of your primary drivers is?
I think I think curiosity
Hmm.
probably is my main thing. When I write, I'm usually writing from the perspective of like I'm not writing because I have something really to say. I'm more writing because I have questions to ask, I
Hmm.
think.
Hmm.
And the same goes for painting and making art, where I'm really sort of like most of the time I'm really trying to like just explore and understand a thing.
Hmm.
Um, it's like there's something where if you set an object in front of you and you sit down and you draw it, you can come away with a better understanding than if you just sort of look at it.
Hmm.
Um, and there's something about that process that um, just ever since I was a little kid, I've really, really, really enjoyed. Um, so yeah, I think I talk about this quite a bit, but there's this quote from Jack Kirby that I just absolutely love, where he talks about uh, meeting, like when he dies or whatever, he's going to meet God and he's going to tell God that the questions were great. And I just love that. Like that to me is like one of the well, like I was talking about earlier, it's like how do you navigate this world of uncertainty? And I think that that is just such a beautiful and sort of optimistic way to approach it, is to be like, I don't want necessarily a clear, concise answer, but I want like really great questions.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I
Yeah,
think that's sort of where I'm coming from.
yeah. It's sort of almost like connecting with a thing on a different level when you.
Yeah, it's sort of like connecting with and maybe for lack of a better word, like just sort of the wonder of the universe.
Mm.
It's like the you set like a little still life on your desk and draw it, and it's like, wow, this still life has a sense of wonder about it, and it's
Mhm.
really sort of incredible that it even exists. And like, yeah, and I'm very fascinated with sort of how things come to exist. Like if you have, just using a still life as a goofy example, like, you could be like, oh, the face, somebody made this face. Was it made by hand or was it made in a factory? And like, how did that factory
Mm.
function? And these plants were grown somewhere
Mhm.
and they were probably refrigerated for a couple of weeks before they came to be here, and
Mhm.
it's like everything has a fascinating history. And going back a little bit to drawing backgrounds, that's something I think about all the time. Like when I'm drawing like a door frame, like I'll often think about, like, I'll be inking it or whatever and put a little ding
Mm.
on the corner, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's when they moved the couch in and they like
Mhm.
sort of bashed it in the door frame right there and stuff.
Mm.
And there's just like I love that sense of everything has a history and has a little story that it is trying to tell you all the time.
Mm. And then even if it is, like you said, a still life, that becomes your voice sort of or your perspective reflected onto that still life.
Yeah, that's like my that what do you call that? Like it's not an idiom, but that story about the parable where the blind men, meet
The
an
elephant.
elephant, and one
The
of them touches
elephant.
the legs, and it's like, oh, an elephant is shaped like a tree, and the other one
Hmm.
touches the trunk, is like, this elephant is shaped like a snake. um yeah, like my drawing is my blind man's exploration of a thing
Interesting.
where I get to see what I get to see that day.
That's interesting. That's
Yeah.
funny because I used that parable actually in talking about the relationship of science and religion. Like there was a short story I had done where I used that. But it never occurred to me to actually think about it in terms of art and recreation. But it's totally true because your still life of the same thing would look completely different from, you know, another artist's drawing of that same thing. If they were sitting in the same spot with the same lighting on the same day, it still wouldn't look the same.
Hmm. There's this really great book, um that I think anyone who loves comics should read. It's called Panel Discussions, I
Okay.
think. It's by a publisher called Tomorrows. And it basically, they take a comic book script
Mm-hmm.
and they give it to three different artists. It's just like a 4 or 5 page story.
Mm-hmm.
And the different artists illustrate that comic book strip. And it is, I think, one of the most, I think it's probably one of the greatest like books on comic book art process ever made, because you can see like how in the hands of three different artists, the stories are completely different stories. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're it's like clear that it's the same story. They say the characters are saying the same things and they're going through the same motions, but
Mm-hmm.
the way the panels are composed, the style of the rendering, it's like all this stuff is so just unique um to the artist that it's just really, it's really fascinating. And I think that's sort of like just how we go through the same, how we go through life. Everybody is just looking at different stuff and taking away different lessons from things.
Mm-hmm.
Even when it looks like you're all both looking at the exact same thing, you're never not, or you
Right.
never are.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, have worked as a graphic designer, and one of the occasionally I would be asked to give little talks about working with design departments and things. And one of
Hmm.
the things that was sort of fun was I said, okay, all right, I want you guys to draw a monster. And I went on this whole description of what it looked like, and everybody
Hmm.
like, took their little pencils and whatever, and like everybody came back with a very different looking thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's another example of that coming from sort of a different angle is, I had a teacher in high school who had us write down instructions. I don't remember what class this was for, but we had to
Mhm.
write instructions for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Mm.
And then he brought in some peanut butter and jelly and bread, and he followed the instructions. And it was
Mhm.
really, really fascinating because you could see like the steps that the writer thought was important often didn't actually communicate the information that the person needed to make the sandwich. It would be like, I don't know if I can come up with a good example, but say like, take out a piece of bread, and he would take out a piece of bread and set it on the counter, and then it would be like, um, put on the peanut butter and jelly, and so he'd like put the peanut butter on jelly on something, not necessarily on the bread, because it didn't say to put it on the bread,
Right,
and
right, right.
and things like that. And that's actually, I guess, going back to story a little bit, I think about that a lot when I'm trying to build my stories. I'm trying to
Mm.
find all of the information that the reader needs to actually build the
Mm.
story in their head,
Hmm.
as close to how I'm envisioning it as they can.
Yeah.
And that's hard sometimes, to know what they need to know.
Hmm.
You have to put yourself in someone else's shoes to hear what you're saying.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it'll happen to me all the time where my editor will come back and say, "Oh, we need more of this here." Like I'm not really, having a sense of
Hmm.
where we are or what's, how she's feeling or what's happening. So, yeah, there is a trick to it. There is an art to it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
my editor has told me that like the thing in my head didn't make it onto the page, and I need to make sure it gets on there.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's the that's the struggle, right? That's the battle.
Hmm.
The struggle is real.
Yeah, that's the whole practice, is really to take that thing in your head and get it out.
Yeah. And sometimes it works great, and then sometimes you have it and it's great in here, and then you get it out
Hmm.
and you show it to someone, and they're like, "Huh?" Um,
Yeah. Yeah, well, and like lots of times too, at least for me, the idea in here doesn't actually work on paper. It's a magical reality in my brain, but on the paper,
mhm,
when it has to actually function, it doesn't. And so I have to,
mm,
come up with a new approach.
yeah. Well, it's I don't know. I think so much of what art is, just to go back to what we were talking about a second ago, um, is perspective, and
Yeah.
that's the real thing. I don't think, just to ADHD onto an adjacent topic, with AI. Like, I don't think that you can get that with AI. Like, it can mimic style, but I don't think it can really mimic perspective.
Yeah. Like I think like my feelings my feelings about AI are that like generative AI, especially for like images
Mm,
and text, is
mm,
like um, an absolute waste of everyone's time and energy. Like I think AI has some like really incredible potential to remove a lot of drudgery from our day-to-day lives and just sort of
mhm,
figure out um, solve problems that our human brain can't really figure out because it takes so much just
mhm,
computational power and like pattern recognition that we just aren't really capable of on huge
mhm.
sets of data. And but like I don't know, to get really nuanced about
Go
it,
for it. Go
because
for it.
I do think that like generative AI is, well, for one thing, there's also all the copyright problems with it, and
Mhm,
there's problems with trying to replace important human communication with sort of meaningless sludge. But I wonder sometimes if, like, because I think art exists in two places. There's like art exists as a creation, and then art also exists a um, as a viewer. Like when a viewer looks at art, it's like the art is the action of the viewer taking something away from it.
mhm,
And I don't know. I wonder about the relationship of a viewer who can take meaning away from AI generated image. You know what I mean? Like I feel like Thomas Kincaid
mm.
is one of my least favorite painters. And sorry if you're watching this, Thomas, but like his paintings look AI generated to me. It's
Mm,
like they really feel there's a real sense of like beautiful rendering with, but it's like wrapped in sort of a purposelessness.
mm,
Like it doesn't, it's like trying really desperately to not actually have, like you were saying, a perspective. It's trying
mm,
really hard not to say anything.
mm.
Um, and and people love it. I mean, he's really like he's a really popular artist.
Enormously, yeah, he's
Yeah.
enormously popular. Yeah, I mean, I can't explain it. I mean, it's sort of interesting. It's nice what he does with light and all of
Hmm.
that. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's like it could as easily be wallpaper, because it
Yeah. I
doesn't say
mean, and it
anything.
literally is like you can buy his
By
paintings as puzzles, like that's his whole thing.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, whatever. I mean, I have Van Gogh puzzles, so I can't really,
Yeah.
you know, I can't really
Yeah.
throw stones there. And but actually, yeah, talking about perspective, because we're gonna loop around again. Um, and still lifes. I remember at the Art Institute of Chicago. I was there in Chicago, and I had a few hours to kill, so I was walking around, and they had like a few Van Goghs, and a couple of them were just still lifes, and even a painting of a bottle and some fruit and a vase or whatever
Mhm.
it was, you could still recognize his eye and his hand and his style and voice in
Yeah.
it. And that was really interesting. It was
Yeah.
like,
It's all like I've been watching a lot of there's a British show called The Portrait Artist of the Year.
Mm,
And it's sort of like it's one of those reality competition shows like the British Bake Off show kind of a thing.
mhm,
But they get people all together and they all paint a single sitter, and you know, they
mhm.
do a portrait of somebody.
Right.
And again, it's like one of those things where it's really fascinating to see what people do. And it's like it's really sort of like you can see the things that they choose to exaggerate and the things they choose to diminish, and the
Mm,
way that they come up against sort of the limitations of
mm,
their own ability to like express the thing that they see, and also like the limitations of what they're capable of seeing. And you know, and there's a time limit too to all that. And
mm.
um yeah, it's a really fascinating show to me. Like it's goofy in that it's a reality show, but it's also
Mm.
like, yeah, you can sort of learn a lot about the perspectives that people are
Yeah,
coming at from.
interesting.
Yeah.
I remember a quote, my mind wants to attribute it to Emmylou Harris. I'm not entirely sure that that's right,
Mhm.
but I remember something along the lines of, quote, style is defined by your limitations.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's there's a lot to that. I don't think that's entirely true, but I think there's a lot to that. Like
Yeah.
I feel like I've been a working artist like basically my whole life, but I don't
Mm,
feel like um I had an art style that was mine
mm,
um until my 30s. Because most of my jobs were doing I did a lot of graphic design stuff, and I did a
mm,
lot of video game stuff.
mm,
And in all of that, I was always just trying to work towards someone else's like style. I had some art
mm,
director, somebody who was like
mm,
driving the style. And I remember there was a point in my 30s when I was drawing, and I found I know I probably a lot of artists will like know what I'm talking about, but I found a way where I like moved my arm, my wrist
mm,
particularly,
mm,
that made this mark that just felt like it fit my body like
mm,
perfectly.
mm,
And so I was like trying to make more and more drawings with just this one specific kind of line, and it's really diversified since then. But as soon as I sort of found this one line, and it would be almost impossible for me to point at a line and be like, this is the line, and have it make sense to anybody in the world other than me.
right.
But it's like there's this way, yeah, there's just this motion and this mark that it makes
Yeah.
that really, like, as soon as I found that, it was like off to the races. And you know, I didn't realize it until
Right.
years later that that is sort
Mm.
of how I had gone. But it was
The birth of your style.
that was yeah, that was it. And
Yeah.
that wasn't, like I said, that wasn't until my 30s. That took a long time to sort of get, and I sort of found it when I stopped looking, you know. And because that's, I guess that's what it is I stopped trying to force a style, and I just sort of started making the marks that felt good.
Mm,
And it was interesting too, because it also made making art feel so much um, more effortless than it ever had before. Like there had
mm,
always been a real struggle to sort of accomplish a look that I was striving for. And then as soon as I just started making the art that felt good, and
mm,
just following that feeling of like,
mm,
this feels good to make, like then I really landed on a style that is
mm,
me. And that's like, there's even been points when I've had to take my artwork to my partner and be like, do I have a style? Is this, because it just felt like so natural. Like I wasn't pushing it in any specific direction. I was just
mm,
following it to where it led. That it felt like styleless to me. And of course my partner
mm.
looks at it and is like, quit being a weirdo. Of course you have a style. This is like 100% what, like, no one else draws like you, Tyler.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, well, I guess that's true. And, but yeah, like that's the thing, is like, as soon as you sort of, well, at least as soon as stopped pursuing a style, is sort of when my style
Mm.
came to be.
Mm,
So I mean, a huge part of that is limitations, but it's also like the path of least resistance, which sounds like a cop out. You know, it sounds like, oh, you're just taking the easy way out, but really, it's just sort of going the way that feels natural and feels good and gets the marks out onto the paper that I need to get out.
right. Well, it's like you get to a point where it's, you have the mechanical skills of whatever it is, and you have to sort of forget
Mm.
about them and just sink into what feels comfortable. And that's
Yeah.
a really hard thing. A lot of people never get there.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of people, and this isn't to disparage anybody who does this, but there's a lot of people who only ever pursue what feels good
Mm,
without doing the technical side of it. And I don't think I could if I hadn't spent all those years trying to force myself to draw in another style and building technical skills along the way.
hmm.
I don't know if I would be able to do what I do today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I tend to agree. I think that technique is important. It's just not everything.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, there's a lot of artists who are technically just, masters, but yeah, they don't bring like the point of view that they bring is about technical mastery and not about like human experience stuff.
Right. And I mean, you see that with musicians and stuff too. Like,
Yeah.
my husband and I had a band in our 20s, and we were pretty serious about it. And so we would bring in session musicians, and like,
Oh
you know,
wow.
you get these session cats in, and they would be technically very skilled, but there was nothing particularly unique about what they were doing. Like, you wouldn't listen
Yeah.
to the recording and be like, oh, that's so and so, it's just like, oh, that's a good background vocal. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, it's funny like I read an interview with Bonnie Prince Billy,
mm,
and he was talking about the first album he did with session musicians,
mm,
and it's sort of like some of my least favorite albums of his. But he's talked about how much he loved it because he could bring people in and tell them what he wanted, and they would do it exactly.
mm,
But yeah, I had that same feeling like where it wasn't. Yeah, well, especially with music, like I love recordings where it's clear that it's a people in a room
mhm.
together, and even if it sounds like even if the audio quality is bad, and they're like hitting a few wrong notes here and there, I love just that feeling, that energy of people making something and people striving for something too is like
Mm.
way more compelling than people accomplishing something, really. The 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 path is when you can hear that somebody is on the path to something
Mm.
as opposed to having arrived, like that's always really fun.
Right. Well, and then, the Holy Grail is when they have both. When they have
Yeah.
I mean, that's when you
Yeah.
get, people like Bowie and, you know, whoever,
Yeah.
like,
Have you ever read Mage, the Hero Discovered? Matt
no,
Wagner.
no,
That
tell me about it.
that is a book. It's about this guy who is the reincarnation of King Arthur, and he has to go on this quest, but he's really just sort of the sad sack who doesn't want to do anything. Um, but over the course of the story, he comes into it and does his thing. But the thing that I really, really love about that book is that Matt Wagner started that, I think, when he was 19 or 20 or something.
Mm,
And the first issue is like not very good. It's just, it's, if you pick up that first issue, it looks very amateurish and stuff. But then by the end, it's like he's really become like this masterful storyteller and a great artist, and like the whole thing has come together, and it's like really fun to read that book and see the creator go on a similar story arc to the character in the thing, where he sort of comes into his powers
mhm.
and embraces them.
Oh, that
I
sounds
think
cool.
yeah, if anyone hasn't read that, that one's really read.
Cool. All right. So we've gotten at least two good book recommendations out of this. Um, So, I guess one last question before we do show and tell, if you brought something.
Oh shoot, I totally spaced the show and tell. But I'm here in my studio, so I can come up with something for you.
Okay.
Let's do this last question.
All right. So the last question is there any media that you're consuming right now? Books, comic books, TV, music, anything right now that's really doing it for you?
Um, I'm watching um Good Omens right now,
Mm,
and it's really fun. It's really fun. I'm not like a big. I have a really hard time watching a whole like television series. Almost always, I get sort of bored, or you know something happens, and I just never come back to it.
mm,
And that one's been fun enough that that I've been sticking with it and have been really enjoying it.
yeah. Well, and
Um,
it's nice. The seasons are short, so it doesn't require
yeah,
that much commitment.
yeah. Um, but I'm also reading an Anne Leckie book. Well, I'm listening to the audiobook of it, but what's it called? Translation State,
Mm,
that I really love. Anne Leckie is it's like a science fiction story.
mm,
And I couldn't do the description of the plot very well, but just Leckie is really good at doing these like really complex science sci-fi worlds, but
mm,
they don't feel complex. She's really good at choosing what you know about the world
mm,
to get through. And there's always just fun sort of gender stuff where it isn't just everyone's binary.
mm,
There's a lot of different gender stuff going on, but it never is even fully explained, in a way. So it's like
mm,
you sort of just have to vibe with it, which I really appreciate. And like it's one of those things where she doesn't necessarily bring a lot of attention to it. It just, like I said, she just sort of, it's just part of the world that they live in, and everyone goes with it, and it's great.
mm.
That's fun. Um,
It's nice. I like when authors trust the reader.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It takes a lot of that to to accomplish something like that. And I guess as far as music, I've been listening to a lot of Jesus and Mary Chain lately, which
Hmm.
is sort of a throwback to my angry
20s
teenage
and
years.
yeah,
But
early, yeah.
I can actually, for some reason, I still like them. I think they sort of like, I think I listened to them less during the darkest years of my teens, so
Mm.
like I can listen to them again now. So what's a good show? Oh, I know what I'll show and tell. Hold on a second.
Okay.
Okay, this book. This is um so I this is a comic book that I bought when I was probably 11 or 12 or something.
Okay. Okay.
This is this is an Australian reprint of Swamp Thing.
Oh my God.
Oh,
Wow.
and it's a collection. So I bought this in Oceanside, California, of all places. So I'm guessing that it was like a military person who had been in
Mm-hmm.
Australia and then
Mm-hmm.
come back, and I bought it at a thrift store
Mm-hmm.
for 25 cents. And
Wow.
it's just got 4 or 5 Swamp Thing stories in it. But it's drawn by, I mean, everyone loves um I'm spacing on the original artist for Swamp Thing. Like I said, names just drop out of my face when I when I do it. Um, man, it's so embarrassing. I don't know. It'll come to me later, maybe. But the second artist on Swamp Thing was this Nestor Redondo,
Ah.
and his work is just some of the most stunning comic book work that has ever been made. So I've been carrying around this book since I was, like I said, like 11 or 12 or something. And finally, I got so scared that it was just going to completely fall apart. I mean, this is literally spent years being on my drafting table, like
Mm.
on the table, just so I could like look at it occasionally. So I eventually like bound it into a little hardcover so it wouldn't totally deteriorate.
Oh,
Um,
that's cool.
yeah, but I really love this book. I love Swamp Thing. And but Nestor Redondo, um, his work is just absolutely extraordinary. Like it's some of the most beautiful comics I've ever seen in my life.
Would you cite him as an influence, perhaps?
For sure, for
Yeah.
sure. Especially like because he does like so he did Swamp Thing. He did another sort of I can't remember the name of the book. Another book for DC that's like a gender swaps Tarzan story.
Hmm.
So he does a lot of these stories that are in the woods and in the jungle, and you can see. So here's a really good example of his influence. Here's a double page spread, just like the intro double page spreads in Harrow County.
Yeah.
And you can see how it says Swamp Thing, like in the art, as opposed to like just a title or whatever.
Yeah.
That's something I swiped directly to put into Harrow County.
Yep. Yep. I see his DNA.
Yeah. Yeah. And just, and you can tell he loves drawing forests and woods. I mean, there's a great scene of Swamp Thing on that cliff. Yeah, and seeing it in black and white is kind of rare. I wish they'd do more black and white reprints of comics, because color's great, but just the line work on a lot of these books are so good that the color hides, you know.
You can appreciate it more when it's just the black and white. Cool. All right, so typically we do a speed round at the end.
Okay.
All right. I'm gonna
start
off with a couple of easy ones just to get warmed up, and then we're gonna just go. Okay. Ready?
Okay.
All right. Super salad.
Salad.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Trek.
Digital or analog?
Analog.
Pick one character from Harrow County that you'd like to have a drink with.
Priscilla. That one was hard.
Valid choice. Pick one character you'd want to have at your side at a table full of lawyers.
Malachi?
Okay. Valid. One that you would want with you at the high stakes blackjack table.
Bernice.
That would be my choice too.
Yeah.
Last one. One that you would make awkward excuses to not hang out with.
Any of the family.
For sure. For sure. All right, cool. Well, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much. I'm going to do my little sign off. But thank you again for coming on. This was really fun. That's our show, you beautiful nerds. I've been your host, Jen Jackalone. Please hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed this chat, and check out the links in the description to keep up with what Tyler's up to. We're keeping you all fed, so for best results, insert in brain, stay hydrated, take care, take it easy, and stay geeky.